All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is noon here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so it's time to get started with this edition of PON Live from the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. I'm Nicole Bryant, the managing director here at the Program on Negotiation, and I am very pleased today to present really only the second live webinar in our series of the semester on the subject of Turn the Tide, Democratizing Negotiation Skills for Global Climate Action. I'm going to introduce that event more specifically in just a moment, but first, a little word about the Program on Negotiation for those joining us for the first time. PON is a research group based at Harvard Law School, and for over 40 years now, we have led the world on research, curriculum development, and executive trainings related to negotiation, mediation, and conflict resolution. And we love to unite our community of scholars and practitioners from all across the world. We know folks are tuning in from lots of places across the globe and bring them together for topics on a variety of issues. Last week, we had our first event of the semester on Syria. Fantastic event. Highly encourage you to join. And we've got a whole slate of things coming throughout the rest of the semester. So we look forward to seeing many of you today and going forward. Today's event will be a 1-hour webinar. We'll have a presentation by our two featured speakers that will last about 40 minutes. And then at the conclusion of that, we will have about 20 minutes for question and answer. If you have a question at any point during the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to input that question, and then we'll have a little discussion at the conclusion of our session. As you can see, this program is being recorded. That means if you have to leave early, if you go get a sandwich, or if you just want to tell a friend, you will be able to view it. It should be on our PON website in about a week for you to share and revisit. I'd like to thank the PON staff who does such a fabulous job putting together these events. So Laura Sampietro, Ken Russell, Riley Schretzel, and Luis Reyes, a big thanks to them for all of their work getting us to this point today. And now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our event and our two speakers. So Turn the Tide is a new and growing open source platform hosting free curriculum of simulations cases for teaching climate negotiations and diplomacy. And today we're very pleased to have the project's co-leaders with us, Monica Giannone of Harvard Kennedy School and Anselm Daniker of Washington University in St. Louis. We have been here at PON following this work for many years. We were actually a very early sponsor of this project. And when I got invited to the official launch of this platform, I knew that we just had to share these incredible resources that Anselm and Monica have created for our wider community. I know that many of you will find it useful and certainly very interesting and thought-provoking. So we're so grateful, Monica and Anselm, if you'd join me on screen for your time and all of your efforts, and so delighted to have been a part of the journey of Turn the Tide. And with that, I will hand the floor over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Nicole. And it's absolutely great to be here at the program on negotiation because, as Nicole just mentioned, they've been integral at implementing this project and helping us move along. And on top of that, there was actually a moment that was very important to inspiring and shaping this project that is also very much connected to the program on negotiation. And I don't actually know whether you know that, Nicole, but it happened about 3 years ago when you kindly invited me and us to the dinner in honor of Christiana Figueres. Christiana Figueres, she received the Great Negotiator Award. Many of you tuning in might know that the program on negotiation gives an award to someone for outstanding achievements. And as Monica will tell you in a second, at that time, we already had started developing ideas of what does it mean to negotiate effectively in international climate settings. But we were still very much thinking about who could our audience be? Who are we actually trying to support in this? And at this dinner, I sat next to a woman who was very calm, didn't talk much, but we started chatting. And it turned out that woman was actually the former lead negotiator of Colombia. And I asked her the simple question, where did you learn to negotiate in these complex settings that seem messy and completely opaque? And then suddenly her demeanor completely changed, and she started telling us the story of her first COP. And she said, I was hired as a forestry expert. She was doing work on forests, and someone came in and they told me of this international conference and that something on forests will be discussed. And can you go there to represent our country? And she got on a plane, and what she did is she had found a copy of the book on behalf of my delegation, a pirated copy that she downloaded, and that was her training. Right? She read a book on the plane, and I asked her, "So what was that like to come there, and was that training enough?" And then she went on to tell me a story of an absolute disaster of a first cop experience. She didn't know how to turn on the mic. She didn't know how to say something. And when someone helped her and told her, "Well, here's how you get in queue," she finally managed to, with shaking hands, make an intervention in a negotiation room. And when she was done with her speech, she tells the story of how the entire room went silent and no one uttered a word, and everyone just stared at her with big eyes as if she had just said the most outrageous thing in the world. And someone else took the floor and said, "How dare the country of Colombia reopen the Marrakesh Accord?" And the next day, she got a call from her foreign ministry where she didn't actually work, officially reprimanding her because people complained about her, and she went to the bathroom crying. And that same person ended up being one of the most influential negotiators over the next 20 years of the climate regime. I can track text of international law that is due to her interventions. And that was because she found mentors and people who shared their experiences with her. And the story that I just told you really was an inspiration because we asked ourselves, oh, interesting. Is there a way we can help people shortcut that process? And it's very linked to a different story that Monica and I had encountered just a few months before that she'll walk you through now.
Great. Thank you, Anselm. And before I jump into that, hello, everyone. It is so nice to be with you all. Echoing Anselm's thanks. Thanks to Nicole and PON for their support, early support and support through now of Turn the Tide and the work that we're trying to do. And yeah, our other story connects very, very closely to what you just heard from Anselm. And this delegate and negotiator. I had the opportunity with Anselm to run a seminar at the Kennedy School actually a few months before this story happened. And in this seminar, we had structured it as a typical negotiation seminar where we would invite some of our colleagues and friends to come and speak about their experiences in the COP negotiations. And it wasn't geared towards climate policy or climate negotiation, but we would have them tell their experiences and layer the negotiation theory that we had been teaching in our classes. And this one colleague of ours, who is the former lead negotiator for the Africa Group of Negotiators, AGN, a very senior and well-respected negotiator, had been in the climate system for decades at this point, told a story and told an experience. And at the end of it, I started rephrasing it, parroting it back, and putting the lens of negotiation theory on it. I wasn't changing the context of what he said. I just was pausing at certain points and layering some of our concepts and skills that we had talked about in our seminar. And I noticed at a certain point that he pulled out his notebook and he started furiously taking notes. And at the end of my reframe of what he had said, he actually raised his hand and he said, "Wait, Monica, can you repeat that one thing you said about X?" And I said, "Sure." So I rephrased whatever I had been speaking about, which was again related to some core negotiation concept. And he was just scribbling it down. And this led to a conversation between him and me and Anselm and that other person that we had on that other slide to think about, what is this? There's something here. There's something that we want to explore more about. And what we found, right, in this collection of all of these stories is that negotiators, especially those often from under-resourced countries that are working in the world's most consequential negotiations, which are the international climate talks or these COP negotiations, the system, often receive no training and often rely on learning by doing. And they know a lot and they learn a lot and they're very effective, but there often isn't this connection to theory. And it was in these moments that Anselm and I had a moment that we realized there's something here that we want to dive into. And this something has become Turn the Tide, which is what we're talking about today. Turn the Tide is in many ways a platform of educational materials, cases, and simulations that we hope everyone listening to this talk and this call can just start to use. That is the goal of it, is that we want to democratize education and get it out there. We're going to show it to you. In a few minutes, we're going to turn to the platform and show you these materials. But before we get to that, Ansem and I will share some of the challenges that we encountered along the way of getting from those stories to then getting to this platform, the challenges and what we learned throughout our process of trying to work with some of these folks to develop trainings that really, really worked for them. Ansem, if you don't mind, why don't you kick us off with some of our challenges?
Right. Yeah, we don't want to give the impression that this was only a smooth ride. So there were a few pieces that really made us scratch our heads that time. And the first challenge of thinking about how do we train people just really has to do with what that world looks like. You might know COP from the press. Like they show up around every November, and there are these annual treaty negotiations where countries come together. And it's one of the most serious negotiations in the world, where countries come together and they figure out, okay, how do we collaborate on climate change? Now, the issue is that it's just a massively overwhelming mess at heart. Right? When you go there, it's not actually just a treaty negotiation. By now, it became this international annual gathering that is sort of a treaty negotiation. And it's also a trade fair where the entire world is coming together and showcasing what they're doing on climate. And then ministries are coming and they're negotiating these intergovernmental treaties. So what you'll see on the top left, that's just the event venue of the Dubai COP 2 years ago. And there are two zones, as you'll see. There's this blue zone on the left, and then there's this green zone. And just so that you get a sense of the scale, in Dubai, there were about 500,000 people registered for the green zone. And then you have about 85,000 people in the blue zone. And the blue zone is where these treaty negotiations are supposed to be taking place. But of course, you don't have 85,000 negotiators, but maybe like 0.1% of those are actually negotiating, right? And the negotiations look completely chaotic, right? You've got countries that are organized in this massive number of overlapping coalitions. And whenever you talk to someone, you don't actually know, are they talking on behalf of a country or are they talking on behalf of a group? Some countries are part of 7 coalitions at the same time. And then on top of that, people negotiate at very different levels. So you've got 3 treaty bodies that are meeting, and then you've got the main bodies. But then underneath that, you've got so-called contact groups. And underneath that, you've got so-called informal groups. And underneath that, you've got so-called informal groups. And the informal groups aren't informal at all. Monica, if you click one along, you see down on the bottom here, that's what they call an informal. And those aren't even advertised on screens. So you don't even necessarily know in which room to be in. So just to give you one example of one room that I happened to be in, they had negotiated for weeks. And at the end of the day, the negotiation kept being delayed for hours and hours, and people ran out and into the room. And at some point, the facilitator came in, followed by a group of high-powered negotiators, and effectively said, there wasn't enough time, there won't be a text. And in that moment, sort of a small huddle of negotiators formed. There was outrage. They sat down around a laptop. They tried to satisfy somehow everyone's demands, get the text in, and sent it onwards. And the text kind of said, well, there's no decision after all. And that's just one room. And you've got these moments happening in 30 different rooms at the same time. And at the end of the day, all of those feed into one single text. So you've got 197 countries who are trying to make decisions, which some rooms negotiating highly political things, others negotiating technical things, right? And the calendars of people are complete chaos. You want to be in 3 or 4 rooms at the same time if you possibly could, but you can't, right? And then all of this is just a tiny dot in like a decade-long diplomatic history. So in short, our first challenge was it's a very, very messy system. It's a hugely messy system, in fact. Now, that very structure is not only opaque, on top of that, there's an additional problem, and that is that it disincentivizes what we would call good bargaining. Right? You see the rooms up there and what they look like. the amount of learning and genuine exchange that happens in this room, you can count in minutes. It really doesn't incentivize you to listen to the other side, to understand where they're coming from. Now, our second challenge was that when we tried to figure out how do you actually survive in this, what does it mean to negotiate well in a setting that looks like this, we wanted to learn from senior practitioners, like the person Monica talked about. And our interviews at the beginning, they really went quite poorly. We wanted to work with them to crystallize a good skill set. So we interviewed a large number of them, and the answers just felt off. We asked them, what are skills that young negotiators need to learn? And they told us things such as, oh, they should know how to make a good speech. And that didn't sound like negotiation theory. And then the third challenge was that we had a super weird audience, if you want. We quickly decided that our goal is to train people such as the negotiator I talked about at the beginning. Technical people in developing countries who face the dire constraint of, I am sent to go on a plane to this negotiation. I have no idea what's going on. But what that really means is we're talking about underpaid public sector officials from countries um, who are usually completely overworked, who are spread across all time zones on the planet, and who tend to show up with bad Wi-Fi. And on top of that, because we wanted to target early career people, they often are very constrained by what they're supposed to do. When we teach negotiation, we love teaching them about the creative resolution of interests. But then you have people who are in a bureaucracy and they're asked to go out and defend the government's position. So their scope to enact the type of negotiation skills that we know is really limited. So we really had to do some soul searching of how do you teach these people, and does it make sense to teach what we know about negotiations theory to these people? And what does it actually mean to do so? And at some point we had a breakthrough.
Our breakthrough, to put it simply, and then I actually am going to go into a little bit more detail of some of the things that Ansem just talked about. But our breakthrough was that we actually needed to stop focusing on skills and asking people to tell us skills and started asking for stories, right? So what do I mean by this? Ansem just hinted at it, but originally we were structuring interviews and we were talking to people, seasoned negotiators from all over the world who had been in this system for decades, but we were saying, tell us about the skills that you think made you effective. Tell us the specific things you wish you had known earlier in your career. And as Ansem said, we got very specific pieces of advice. We heard things like, oh, you need to know how to negotiate text really effectively. Really, what they meant is placement of commas, shall versus must versus can versus should, negotiate text effectively. We heard write a good position paper, right? Write a mandate, write a statement. Again, to what Ansem already has illustrated, not exactly in line with a lot of the negotiation principles that we typically want to talk about. We think about interest-based negotiation. We heard a lot around writing good position papers, how to make an effective plenary statement in the 30 seconds you have available when your microphone turns on. How do you speak effectively? And then these broad ideas like have empathy, but we couldn't really figure out what that actually means or how that shows up within this formal process. Essentially, what we heard was stories that would make people either good, effective operators or good, effective outsiders. Okay, so operators within the system or outsiders outside of the system. But there was a challenge in this because effective operators keep the status quo of the flawed system. And effective outsiders are unable to influence the system from within. So we had to think about this and shift our approach, right? So what did we do? We actually started asking a very different question to the folks that we were meeting with and interviewing. We started asking them, can you tell us a story? Can you tell us a time when something happened positively that you didn't expect? Can you tell us about the constraints that you faced in those moments? Can you tell us about how you felt when this was happening, who you called, who else was a part of solving or thinking about this dilemma with you? And when we shifted and started asking questions in that way, we got very different types of answers. We got answers and we could see underneath it the negotiation principles that we had been looking for. So ideas around how do we create new coalitions, right? We saw how do we think about sequencing moves. On coalitions, I should also say, build coalitions in very flexible ways. So coalitions mean something very rigid in the climate regime, right? There's a formal block. And so in our initial set of questions, that's what we heard a lot about. But here we started thinking about and hearing about how do we build coalitions in strategically flexible ways? How can we sequence moves not only in these plenary sessions, but outside the room? How can we creatively influence process and design new ways to engage each other? And how can we strengthen and build informal alliances that also transcend the informality in some ways and start to shape and influence the formal alliances and spaces? And through our stories, then we started to see a few things. Many of the multi-party negotiation principles come to life, right? And these principles in action. How did they actually show up for folks in these different, very complicated spaces of negotiations? So until then, we had been kind of thinking that we were operating with these two challenges. Oh man, we're either going to structure skill training and workshops and curriculum materials, everything that Turn the Tide has become, but we're either going to have to focus on this effective operator, being really effective in this messy and problematic and flawed system, or being really effective in the outside. And through the stories, we actually started to see that there's a third group, a group that we're interested in both learning from and targeting. And we call this group our practical idealists, right? So what do we mean by practical idealists? Are people who can work within the system and understand its constraints and barriers, but can effectively and creatively think about ways to influence the process as well and overcome those barriers. And these people became the targets of our interviews, of our protagonists for our cases and simulations, and also in many ways, the targets of who we hope to recruit to our programs or who we think will eventually be practical idealists at one point. So for later in their careers. So for example, if we're recruiting a lot of folks, which we are, who are younger in their careers, late 20s, early 30s, have been to at least a COP, but they're younger and more junior in their delegations, can they become these practical idealists who can work effectively within the system, but also effectively influence it in creative ways outside of the formal system as well? So we've continued this practice of collecting stories, but in some ways our goals focused on three. It became much clearer in our mind what we were trying to do. First, we were trying to teach the fundamentals. Yes, everyone needs them. We teach the fundamentals of negotiation, but think about how can we help negotiators become good analysts who understand the constraints and barriers they're facing within the system, and three, use creative ways to overcome them. So in some ways, this was clarifying for us. We knew kind of our audience. We knew the folks we were going to talk to create materials, how we would talk to them, and we had a streamlined purpose. We've continued this practice now. We continue to collect stories of these practical idealists. We're hear about their experiences, hear about their lives and their constraints, but we're thinking through the lens of negotiation theory to create new materials, simulations and cases, and importantly, democratize access to these materials. And this is how we think of Turn the Tide, filling this gap in some ways between the real world of this very intense, complex negotiation system and what we know to be really useful, helpful, universally applicable principles of negotiation. This process and this project has the mission of getting the stories and theories packaged in a way that's accessible. And I want to say it's not just for folks who are within the regime or folks who work in climate negotiation. We'll talk more about this in about 10 minutes, but we've been fortunate to use our materials globally and with audiences as diverse as the mid-career class at the Harvard Kennedy School, and then in the same week, virtually with the pro-democracy movement in Myanmar. And so I think when you go now into transitioning into seeing the materials and the platform, I want two uses in your mind, which is, well, three, I guess. One is, of course, folks who are working in the international climate regime and have that as their focus. Your classes, like the Kennedy School mid-career students, classes if you teach them, but then also a global audience who may actually not be interested very much in working on climate policy within their countries or globally, but can learn the principles through the materials. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it back to Ansam to start moving us through some of the materials. Ansam, would you like me to continue sharing until you go to the platform, or would you like to go to the platform now?
Let me take over the screen, which I should have done now. We've now told you a lot about the genesis of the project itself, and of course, you want to see, well, what actually exists now. What are we providing? We thought it was important that you understand how we ended up there and what our process was. So really what you're about to see now is sort of the last step in this iteration, because all of the materials that we just talked about now exist out in the world, and we would love for all of you to use them. So what you see here is just a very high level overview on what's on the website. Right? So our materials are really clustered around 3 buckets. First bucket is get the fundamentals right. The second one is about managing barriers to understanding one another. And then the last one is mastering the complexity of large-scale negotiations with many parties. You'll find a total of 13 products and 20 videos on there, and I'll say a bit more about that. With that, I want to immediately turn to the website. I hope that you're all seeing my website now being shared. In designing this website, one thing was critically important to us. As we thought about democratizing access in the content of our trainings, so we try to target people and participants who usually don't have access to training, we're now trying to target people who may be completely outside of the world of negotiations. So this website has been designed, hopefully, so that anyone can use it, not just people who teach negotiations. And that was the sort of the main thought in this. You'll see that the website is structured here around clusters or exercises. Effectively, you can navigate to each exercise either through looking at the exercise library, or you can say, all right, let's take a look at teaching the fundamentals. And once you click on that, you have a video about, okay, what does it actually mean to teach the fundamentals? So if someone has never taught negotiation fundamentals, they can get a sense here by watching the video, and then they have a number of different exercises. And then for the exercise, we try to create an interface that allows everyone to, in an instant, get the relevant information they need to get a sense of, does it make sense for me to teach this, right? So you'll see how long it takes, you see the topics, you see a lot of information about how to teach it, the context of it, and who is it best for. And then we have a short sort of 3-minute video that tells you, if you want to run this exercise, here's what you need to know. And then all of the materials are freely available. You've got a teaching guide, and that teaching guide includes a full breakdown of here's how you can teach it. And it includes debriefing slides. So if you don't want to create your own slides, you can use the slides. The debriefing guide, I will show you just so that you see it here, includes a 1-page overview. So as soon as you open it, you can take a look, and in 1 page, you should have enough information about how to teach this and whether that makes sense to you. One thing that is very important for us, you will see down here. You've got videos. So imagine you are someone who's a climate science professor and you thought, oh, it would be really interesting to teach my class about good negotiating, but you don't actually know negotiation fundamentals. Well, of course, if you're a negotiation person, you can teach your own concepts and you can use the exercise to illustrate it. But if you're someone who's a climate science professor or a consultant, you might not want to teach negotiation fundamentals, so you can just show people a video. Or you can show people a video about what a BATNA is, or about the concepts of interests in negotiations, right? So we try to really create a whole host of materials that make it incredibly easy for anyone to teach this. You will see that we also try to create short exercises, because a lot of people will tell us, well, there's never enough time. So you can just say, do we have exercises up to 1 hour? And you'll find a lot of short exercises that you can run in any timeline. What I also want to point out, just because they've become our favorites, is we have a lot of cases on here, especially when it comes to the complexity of negotiation. We very much believe in cases as a wonderful tool, and you will find a lot of cases that showcase people who really try to push the boundaries of the system, following the same basic method. And again, you have everything, including debriefing slide here, and then you'll find explainer videos that focus on complexity. Right? Coalitions in the climate regime, sources of complexity in climate negotiations. We have a long interview with colleagues. So a lot of colleagues are featured on this website that talk about their work in climate negotiations. And of course, there's a full video library. If you just want to look around and get inspired, on the main page at the bottom, you'll see a ton of different videos, all the way from interviews, concept videos that you can just use for your purpose as you see fit. So this is the website. I want to give you a broader overview over what's on there, but I'm not going to go through everything in detail. So if you are someone who's interested in teaching fundamentals, you'll find about 5 exercises on there, anything from more traditional simulations to shorter exercises that you can run pretty much in any setting. When it comes to managing barriers to understanding one another, we're really thinking about the interpersonal process of communication when beliefs are very different, or when there's conflict. And we have 2 exercises here, and we've got a session that doesn't come with an exercise yet, but we're developing it on gender and negotiation. And then what I also wanted to point out, this is the main important piece. When it comes to the complexity of large-scale negotiations, we have a lot of cases and we have very different types of cases. So we also took this opportunity to think about our pedagogical model a little bit. And we have some cases that are classic scenario analysis. Bad Cop and Not Much Copenhagen is the story of a failed cop. Now, we go in there and we use that to analyze with people what went wrong here. And then we have other cases that are centered more traditionally around a protagonist, that put the participants in the shoes of the protagonist and let them make strategic decisions. And then we also have what we call stop and assess cases. For instance, to teach people how to craft an effective stakeholder map, they read the case and they translate immediately what they find in a stakeholder map. So there's a lot of variety of products on there that hopefully you find interesting if you want to take a look. And I also want to make a plug because we've got 2 big exercises coming up that are very complicated. And that is one, the Paris Climate Agreement. So there's a mock negotiation on negotiating an actual agreement. And then there is another one that is called Boiling Point. That is another innovative one because it also teaches people climate politics. You have tons of videos on there, right? On the basics, you have videos on complexity, and you've got videos on interpersonal and special topics. And the important piece for us is everything that's on there is open source. So anyone can use it for however they want to use it and for their own contexts. Now, what I do want to note that's important here, these materials can be used as a full curriculum. So you can decide, I want to teach a climate negotiations class. That's what I'm currently doing. I'm teaching a whole class that pretty much uses almost all of the exercises on there. You can use it for specific exercises for all different types of purposes, but there are also a few sequences that work very well. And Monica is going to run you through how we've used these exercises and in which contexts.
Great, great. And what I'd tell people at this point is in just a few minutes, we're going to turn to Q&A. I see a couple in the chat, but please, please, please put your questions in. We'd love to have any type of discussion with all of you on this. But what's between you and Q&A is hearing what Ansam just teed me up for, and then what you actually could do here. Well, how could you get engaged with us? How might you use this, and what's next for us? But as Ansam said, our materials, we have a lot of ways that we're trying to use them. You can put it in a climate course, you could put it in a negotiation class, you could do it in a totally different class, not in a class at all. Maybe you're on a delegation and want to run a discussion with one of the cases to get some of the points in. Many, many, many uses. What you see on the screen now is, I'm not sure if it's completely 100%. I think there hopefully are other places we're using these that we don't know, but we're trying to capture where folks are putting these into programs and classes. And what you'll see is kind of 3 segments. There's courses that we and our colleagues are teaching, where they're putting some of the materials in them. Most, but not all of these are negotiation classes, but the one actually at Harvard College is more of a communications class. So it's just as an example of being able to use some of the materials, even if the course is not specifically on negotiation. We're hoping to increase this in the future. As Ansam said, these materials and the platform is really developed for folks to use anywhere that they're sitting, any types of teaching that they're doing. But what you also see here is the different names are listed in different sequences because we've created ways to put things together or to have them be one-off. And so in some of the classes, you're seeing sequences. You can see obviously in the bottom bullet point on the bottom left, that's Anselm's class that he's teaching, a climate class, and it has most of our work in it, right? Now there's more obviously, but it has most of our work in it in a specific sequence. So you could do that if you wanted to actually teach a climate class. And then on the top right, you see that we do a lot of executive education programs, and we're using a lot of our simulations, often more our simulations than our cases in our executive education programs. These are 3-hour sessions with a group of executives who are there for a week. Generally, this is not a negotiation class. Maybe it's focused on leadership or public leadership or public policy in some way. And we've been putting these materials there. The last cluster on the bottom right are training programs, which are outside of the formal degree program classes, outside of executive education, other opportunities we have to work with and engage with folks globally. The thing to kind of have in mind here, and I already referenced it, but I think there's other examples of this that actually are not on the screen. This bottom bullet point. We teach a negotiation and leadership program in Myanmar for the pro-democracy some of the civil society activists in Myanmar right now, and we use some of our cases because the complexity of the COP process and the challenges of group decision making with lots of historical relationship contexts that need to be taken into consideration, information asymmetry, identity, and culture is really relevant and transferable in that context. And so why I give that specific example, and there are more of them, is think about generally the folks, the type of work you're doing, the folks you're engaging with. There may be something in our materials, even if it's outside of the climate audience for you. And then next slide, I'd love to talk about just for a second, our team. There's two things to note here. One is this is a multi-university collaboration. And so Ansem is at Washington University in St. Louis. I'm at the Harvard Kennedy School. We're actively talking to other folks at different universities. We have lots of other faculty involved in different ways, using simulations, writing simulations. The other person here that I should mention, many of you may know, is Professor Brian Mandel, who's with us at the Kennedy School, who is one of our project team members, co-leads as well, and has been a big influence, mentor, and help in this work as well for the past few years. Then on the right-hand side of the screen, the bottom two pictures, you'll see we have advisors, and these are advisors who were on seniors in their delegations, leads of delegations, who are now advisors to our work and help make sure that we keep the practitioner focus and lens really loud in our work, in our mission, and in our cases. They're essential to our work, Tina and Andrea. And then now what I'd love to do is introduce you to Aditya. Aditya Bayani is our fellow, our day-to-day lead of this project. He is, I was going to call him our fearless leader as we plow into the next stages of this project, because so far everything we've done, this is a little bit phase one of getting this material and this platform up and running. And Aditya, who was a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School, the 2-year MPA program, he graduated in May, and he's now working with us full-time on this project, and will now take us through a few things. One, what's next for our project, so you know where we're going, and some ways you may be able to get involved. So with that, Aditya, thank you so much for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Monica. So good to be here. Broadly, I think the next few months at Turn the Tide for us are focusing on 4 big things that we are prioritizing. One, we are always on the lookout for new simulations, cases across different themes, geographies, and negotiation skills possible. So we would be on the lookout for adding more content, which can make currently the platform even more robust. Second, if you are an educator right now on this webinar, if you're a professor, if you're a student, or if you're a researcher who thinks that this would be useful in your context, we'd love to get in touch with you, because we want to mainstream this idea of having an open source platform for democratizing climate negotiations. So please get in touch if you can help us, because this is going to be our plan for the coming year, to speak with as many universities as possible. Third, we are internally trying out some cool ideas of having AI integrated into this. So how can we create an AI curated library, or how can we have an AI coach for some of the simulations as part of the offerings as well? So again, my ask would be, if you think you are working in this space and if you have cool ideas for us, please get in touch, because that's something which the team is trying to do to make the platform as efficient and as user-friendly as possible. And the last thing would be to expand the scope of the platform in itself. Currently, I think what you would be hearing is that we are focusing a lot on how you can teach some of these materials. I think in the coming years, what we'd be focusing on is that how can students also leverage some of these teachings? How can practitioners come to this platform to get deeper knowledge of either the regional climate context or climate science in more depth. So I think expanding some of the use cases that we have for the platform would be the fourth focus area. I think the last thing which I would want to focus on would be how we can get in touch. There are two ways we would be willing and would be eagerly waiting to speak with you. I think the first would be if you think some of these materials are useful in your context, please start to use them. They're all under Creative Commons license. If you think you would require support from our side in adapting or in contextualizing it, we'd be very happy to get in touch as well to make sure that these are most relevant. And the second is I want to tie back to the point in the beginning of where the genesis of Turn the Tide happened. We started with collecting stories. So if you think you have stories, cases, simulations that can teach underlying negotiation frameworks, tools, and principles well, we would love to have some collaboration with you. We would love to see how we can use and take advantage of the content and the expertise and experience you may have, and if that can be put on the platform. So at last, I think we will put out our contact information, and we can share it as well as part of this webinar. But that's what's going to be my offer and ask at the end of this. So that's on the next steps of this webinar. I'm going to hand it back to Monica to take us through what's next for us here.
Amazing. Thank you, Aditya. I hope for many of you who are excited and enjoying that this is the beginning of you meeting us, and that you will have many more conversations with Aditya in particular as we all go through this journey together. But what's next for us in this webinar, almost perfectly on time, 1 minute over, but I'm pretty proud of us, is I think I'm inviting Nicole back. Nicole, do you mind helping us with the Q&A? Hopefully we have some good questions coming our way.
Absolutely. And thank you all for that wonderful presentation. I already knew some of this, but it's so great to watch. And I am sure that our community really appreciated the opportunity. So my first question for you is, who got to name Bad Cop and Not Much Copenhagen? Who is the pun master? I knew it, Ansel.
Please.
I was willing to place a bet, but okay, great. No, but in a more serious note, you have so many materials here. Is there a favorite or a standout or something that you feel that, folks should really be paying attention to? It's okay to name a favorite child in just this instance.
I have a favorite child. I have two favorite children, and then Ansem, I'm sure you have some as well. I love simulations. I love simulations so much. Greenhouse Gridlock, the two-party version, I use all the time. I love this. It's really excellent. It both teaches you a good bit about the climate regime and some of the hot, contentious topics and why they're hard and tricky in the climate space, which, just roughly for folks on the call, is about the frequency of reporting of greenhouse gas emissions, but it taps into all of the tricky issues. Historic responsibilities, differentiation between developed and developing nations. Does that differentiation matter? How do we talk about it? Conflicting priorities of home countries. It is excellent at doing both really good interest-based negotiation and also teaching you about the regime. So that's my first one, my simulation. My case favorite may be the same as Ansem's case favorite. So I'll actually pause and see if you want to jump in here. And if it's different, then I'll come back on and talk about my case favorite.
I'll jump in here because one of the things you'll realize between Monica and myself, we work with each other too much. So our thoughts tend to align in sometimes productive and sometimes unproductive ways. I'm 100% content. It is Greenhouse Gridlock on the simulation side. And then for the case, it is the Cartagena dialogue. The Cartagena dialogue, I think, is a story that really tells us about, and specifically the integrated version with Bad Cop and Not Much Copenhagen, which is a condensed version of both cases in one. It tells us so much about negotiating and about taking action. The case really is about the aftermath of the Copenhagen COP, which was a diplomatic disaster of epic proportions, as it was often called. And there was a real question of the multilateral regime being in shambles. And should we keep doing this charade, or should we just do deals between the US and China and be happy with that? And there was a group of negotiators who across traditional divides said, let's get together and at the outset, let's just listen to each other and hear each other. And let's create a format that gets out of this context that pits us against enemies and try to make some progress. And from just understanding one another, over time, they became this very, very influential strategic group that drove a lot of ideas into the process and made real change. And I think that was part of many groups that did that at this time. And I saw one question in the Q&A that I can't address directly, but indirectly through that case, that was about finance. And I think there was a good diagnosis. For instance, right now, we are in a huge problem with respect to the financial provisions. And I don't know the answer of what something is going to happen. But I know that we've got precedent internationally when there were moments when the regime was about to collapse and some people with integrity got together and they created a process that allowed them to move forward from within the system by creatively pushing its boundaries. And I think there's a lot of inspiration in there to figure out from a negotiation perspective. I'm not a finance person. How can you get the right people in a room under which process expectations so that we can make headway? And I hope that there's inspiration in these cases. Sorry, that was a very long answer to a very simple question,
No,
but I
but it's
really love the
great.
case.
As lots of folks are just discovering these materials, I think it's wonderful to give the preview, and how wonderful as ever that you two are so aligned. Question about how you're measuring the efficacy of these trainings. Are you following up with COP delegations that you've been training after? Are you, are there surveys? How are you making sure that these materials are getting used in the best possible way?
I can start off with it. I think as anyone who does negotiation training knows, measuring the efficacy of skills building is I think we would call it a toughie in the technical language. It's not easy, right? So we're doing classic pre and post questionnaires, of course, but everything is self-reported. And that is sort of like one of the benchmarks that we're having, and we're tracking that, and we effectively it is we try to get that comfort level at the beginning. How comfortable do you feel with the situation? How comfortable do you feel now? And then we do basic training on literally just like, what does this concept mean to you now, etc. And then we collect a lot of qualitative data where they just give us ideas of how they use the concept. What I also don't want to underestimate, which is less scientific if you want, but more gratifying and tells us something, is just stories of people. We train young negotiators. A few of them are now very influential. And one of them is in one of the islands. He's now, if you want, the CEO of the climate ministry. Another person right now is now the head of delegation 2 years after doing the first training, because she moved through the ranks. And we are in touch with these people. We actually actively work with these groups of people, and they will tell you stories of how they use the concepts. Part of our mandate at this COP in Brazil is also to go there and talk to the people and ask them, how did you use them, so that we can add them to the website. So that is not scientific tracking, but it is tracking that I would at least call very informative for us to get a good sense there.
Yeah.
I just add one thing to that, Nicole, which is exactly agree. One big piece of our work we're also doing is, as Ansum just said, we're going to COP and we talk to folks and we collect stories, and we also have sustained engagement. So he just told the story of the person who's kind of building an informal coalition we're able to track. So we're collecting stories, or what are the things you're doing this year, and just seeing if we can find any concepts, patterns, dynamics behind it. This year, though, for COP in Brazil, Aditya will actually be going. We're all going for the first bit of it, but Aditya will be staying the whole time. And one of the things he's doing while he's there is he'll be coaching folks and talking to them about what's going on, zooming them out, going back to concept and theory, and also watching for these types of moments that sometimes are kind of hard to self-report. But one of the things that we have learned throughout this process, and I think it won't be new to a lot of folks on the call, is coaching really helps. So you have the framework, but when you're in a classroom, it's easy to say, oh, I'm using my negotiation brain, the theory and the concepts that Monica and Ansum told me to remember, I'm remembering. But then you go into the field and it's whoosh, because it's chaos. And we saw that screen that Ansum showed. It's so hard when you're in the weeds to zoom out. And so Aditya will also be there to help people zoom out. And through that process, we're hoping to learn quite a bit, because we haven't actually, as a team, been able to have someone stay for the whole duration of COP to kind of see day by day with reinforcement and these being able to zoom out what can happen. So we'll have more hopefully to report on that in just a few months, but it is something we think a lot about.
That's great, and we're wishing you all a successful trip. And I think looking forward to learning if there are any aha moments on how these materials are being used, right? And yeah, and you perhaps have some already, but obviously this is an ongoing process, and you're gonna keep learning about that. Going to a couple of questions that we have in the chat. We have one from Alex who's asking uh, how to properly use these resources. Those that are free, how should they be cited? Maybe you could just point us, as long as we're all here, to the best place and correct way to do that on the website.
Great.
I can be very quick about that. You can use anything that's on the website if you don't alter it, and give us credit. Now, the tricky piece are the slides, because we wanted to give you slides so that you can use them. And on the slide itself, at the beginning, you have a short instruction that helps you to do that, which honestly is either use our slide or create your own. And if you create your own, but you use some of our thoughts, just give us credit. And it's licensed in a very particular way, and the license is also on there. So feel free to use it however you want. Make sure that we know that people know where it comes from.
And Alex has an additional question, which is, are you planning to translate these into any other languages? For example, Spanish. You might have some volunteer translators in the group.
Yes, 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 yes. We want to. We're playing with different tools. We're looking at AI functionality. We're looking if we want to just translate and have different versions available. If you translate them and you are confident in your translation, please let us know. Please always let us know if you're using them. We just want to know. We're just super excited and curious. But if you translate them, please let us know. And if there's some way for us to check that the translation makes sense and is to the original, we would love to also put that on the website and make sure that folks can access it. We have one colleague who's working right now on thinking about, we'll see if we move to translating, but thinking about translating into French as well, so we can make sure that these materials are accessible for Francophone countries as well. So yes, actively on our mind, thinking about it from a variety of angles, and would love to continue the conversation.
I'm happy to review the French if you need someone.
Oh, good. We'll take you up on it.
We have a question about cultural norms in these materials and whether there are any modules. I believe I saw something on gender, on cultural norms that would help participants take into account this real meeting of the entire world on these important topics.
The short answer is not yet. We with a little bit of addition, we would love to, but it's what I would call another toughie, because it's literally the entire world meeting and people from all over the world meeting. But as a consequence, it has developed its own cultural context. Right? The idea of climate negotiations is not just different countries coming together, has its own context. And on top of that, I'd say the differences between the lawyers, the foreign policy people, and the technical people there is at least as relevant as the national cross-cultural context. And it is very much on our mind, and we do teach it, but in terms of like crafting materials around it, we haven't wrapped our heads around that. But this is a living platform, so this is not a static product to go out. This is for us to keep pushing. So thanks for pushing us, because we do get things wrong for sure. We're also interested in your work and hosting your work, and I'll take it as an appropriate push for something that I very much believe is deeply relevant.
Yeah, wonderful. Anything to add? Don't want to cut off.
Yeah, I think one thing Ansem said, but I'll lift it, is I think in our cases, you'll see stories of the challenges of cross-cultural negotiations in moments, and we have debrief points around how certain moments present as barriers or opportunities. Mostly there are just a lot of stories of people confronting difference and figuring out how to overcome it. And so they're often in the stories. And I think what we're eager to do in the future is like we've done with gender and negotiation, develop like modules on it that specifically can talk about what's the best research, what's the best thinking on cross-cultural negotiations that we haven't yet done.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, another avenue to explore, as if you needed more on your September to-do list. We have a question from Margaret around collaboration. If you're working with different climate policy groups, and to what extent you might be working with other organizations who are doing some of this work with climate change negotiators.
Great. I'll speak generally, and then Ansam or Aditya, if either of you want to come in, you're of course, please do. But one of the things Aditya is doing a lot in his work is thinking about who our collaborators should be and who is doing what already, and how can we bring together folks into conversation so that we are aware of the different skill building and training programs that exist in the broad umbrella of negotiation trainings for folks in the climate arena. And so we are actually actively working on this to, at the minimum, make sure we know of each other and know what everyone is doing, but hopefully can work more collaboratively with each other, and hopefully can think about, you know, really not just being connectors for the different work that we're all doing, but maybe even create something new. So yes, working on that as well. And that is one of the future pieces of the platform that we're quite excited about. Ansem, anything you want to add specifically on that?
No, nothing specific. Maybe I'll say one high level thing about that, because I think that's the um ultimately our goal in this is simple. We want to get good stuff to as many good people as possible, right? And so there's, in terms of collaborating with us, our time and resources are limited. And that's always the only problem. But like any good stuff that you might have that could be on the website, let's put it on the website if it's follow the basic ideas. And then getting good stuff out there, for us, it's like finding targeted ways to reach people who could use the skills, and that's the training arm. And then it's like finding educators who might be interested, and that's the other arm. So any idea that you have, and like getting it to educators, or getting it to people, or getting good stuff on the platform, like that's, we love that, with the only constraining factor being our time, but never our passion and desire to do it.
Yeah. You'll see that we just reposted your contact information in the chat, and I will say we have people volunteering to translate in various languages, asking if you would come train in their home countries. So I expect that you will be hearing from a number of people at the conclusion of this. I just love to ask a final question, which is, you know, you've been doing this work for so long, you have finally launched this wonderful resource for all of us. Is there a favorite story that you would like to leave us with from all of your various trainings of negotiators? Because I think this work is so inspiring, and it's only just beginning.
Mm.
Oh, a toughie.
I think I have two, but now I need to think about which one it is. It is a wonderful negotiator whose name I will not reveal, because I don't know whether she authorizes me to, who's now a head of delegation. And she started 2 years ago, and at the last COP, her country itself had a very small footprint on the regime because they didn't know how to. And she got into it, and she not only took over that delegation, but she then went out to find funding to add about 10 other people to that delegation. And from a country that virtually was an observer to the regime rather than an active country, they are now a very active country, and they're a bridge builder. They have become the identity of a bridge builder between different groups. And on top of that, she's now looking at the platform of having met all of the other young people in other countries, of continuously throughout the year having conversations with them, so that they get a sense of how do we strengthen both intergenerational equity and respect our specific country's interests. And she's just been running. And I talk to her fairly regularly, and there's no one that has asked me as annoying questions in any training. She drove me nuts. Right? But she's wonderful because she's taken it to heart. And every time I meet her, she tells me the next story. And I think just that the person that she became so quickly, because she didn't fall in love with the system, but she said, okay, what can I do within my scope of action to be a responsible bureaucrat, but also to run? And that for me is just the best story.
That's great. That's wonderful. Monica?
That was the story with more detail than I would have told, but I'll add a different. We do share a brain too much. Also, it's just the best story. She's just the best, so it
Great.
has to be her. But I will say one more. There was, and it's replicated, but there was this one very specific moment that I think is always powerful in any time you're doing a negotiation training, but especially within this regime, which is we were working in a coaching session at a COP, folks who had gone through an first training session with us, and now we're putting it to practice. And then we did peer coaching And there was this moment in peer coaching when this person realized, I've thought of negotiation as this very specific thing that you could only do if you wore a formal hat from your delegation, and it has to do with speaking rules. And I saw her have this aha moment that negotiation is all the time. Anytime I have to think about making decisions, working with other people, it's in my personal life, it's in my professional life. And if I think about it that way, I can become better at it so that I am more effective when I'm wearing that hat of negotiator. That moment, I love that moment. And she had a very specific one, and I think it's transformative. So for me, that's the exciting piece of being able to work with folks in a very specific, constrained environment, but see how these skills are tools to really think more expansively than that.
Yeah, well, very, very well said. Thank you to the three of you for this wonderful presentation. We have really enjoyed having you on. I'm just going to close us out with a little word about what's coming up. So we are actively unveiling our entire slate of sessions for PON Lives over the course of the semester. There are many more who I'm waiting for titles to be able to put up, but our next event is on October 14th with Professor Katie Kaufman of Harvard Business School. So we look forward to seeing you on that date. We also have our list of all of our upcoming both in-person and virtual training opportunities at the Program on Negotiation. A big thank you once again to the Turn the Tide team, as well as to the PON staff, and wishing everyone here a wonderful rest of your day, whatever time it might be. Take care.